Do you think UFOs, the paranormal, weird history, cryptozoology, and outsider art are pretty darn cool? Then you're in the right place. Welcome to High Strangeness with your host, Steve Berg.
The video version. Hello, my friends. Welcome back to another episode of High Strangeness. Tonight, I have a giant in the paranormal TikTok realm, a paranormal investigator, a trained mortician, a renaissance person of the weird, and I mean that in the best possible way. Welcome, Beckie-Ann Galentine. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
Good. Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it. How like we were just talking before we got on the air that you're gearing up for the season, the big season, Halloween.
Oh yeah, I have, well, not even Halloween, it's the weeks leading up to it that are pretty much relentless. So we start with Michigan Paracon in a few weeks,
Oh, that's a
and
big one.
yeah, so doing a panel there, and then I have a few weeks off, but like I think the first 2 weeks of September, and then we jump into the Strange Escapes cruise that goes to the Eastern Seaboard. So I'm kind of modifying my grief and ghost hunting lecture to be a little more seaside. So talking about like seaside burials and people buried in rum kegs and fun things. And then immediately after getting back from Strange Escapes, I have a 2-day break, and then it's down to Disney with Aaron Sagers and Shane Pittman. So it's the busiest year I've had ever.
Like I was saying, it's good to be busy. You'll be exhausted when it's done, but then you'll probably have a lot of things to get back to that you were neglecting. You'll be
Yeah.
busy in a new way.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's mainly the house starts to be chaos, and it's like equipment, paranormal equipment, just strewn everywhere. Like there's batteries, things charging, haunted objects like that I've like taken out of boxes and just set to the side. So it will die down, but that's not even getting into October, so it's going to be a
Right.
pretty big year.
That's great, though. That's great. Can I ask you a question? You said something about how you're kind of gearing your I think you said Strange Escapes lecture to kind of like fit the seaside theme. And what is a seaside burial? What does that entail?
So it's in the old times, we used to just cast a body over, and it's like what, an honor system. You could just, they died at sea, so we threw them over, and now we have rules, so we still have to file death certificates, and you actually have to get permission from the Coast Guard. It has to be a certain mileage away. You could put cremated remains, I hate when people say cremains, but cremated remains anywhere you wish, and they actually make urns that are disposable, that will dissolve in the ocean. They're like little seashell shapes and stuff. So
That's
that's
great.
cool, right? But a body, some people kind of feel it's like a biohazard, but with all the things in the ocean, whales die in the ocean. I don't think humans are too much different with the,
Right.
it's not going to do that. But it is a very in-depth process, and most people don't see the benefit. But yeah, you have to go a certain mileage from the shore, and it's not like it used to be. The other thing that they would do back then is sometimes they often say rum kegs, but a lot of times it was actually brandy. And if you would die while on voyage, they would put you in a keg, and a lot of people were just buried in those kegs, so they didn't take the body out. So it was a temporary arrestment of the biological decomposition. So rather than using formaldehyde, which forms what's known as the methylene bridge, and you now have a preserved body, it just kind of removes the bacterial growth a little bit, but you're still going to decompose in there. It's not going to be pleasant when you get back. So very
Right.
interesting things I've been diving into. My traditional lecture kind of goes through the way that we grieve, because I spent time embalming during the COVID pandemic, and I thought, man, the COVID people are going to be the next tuberculosis pandemic ghosts.
Mm-hmm.
So we have all these ghost stories that start with these pandemics, and that's where I started churning that. And so I normally talk about the decline of the Western funeral practice, how things have changed, legalities, it's sanitized, and now I have this version of it that I'm working, because we're going on a cruise for a week, and I kind of want to bring some new ideas. Because how many ghost stories start with someone waiting for someone who never returned from sea? And of course, the Titanic will be visiting the Titanic graves. So there's a lot going on there.
Cool. That is amazing. Let me ask you really quick, just because I am very naive to this. Has the quality of like burials and people's, what is done with people's remains, has that improved in the modern era, or was it better before?
So, what happens is traditionally people were laid out in a parlor at home and you got to be with your loved one. They die at bedside, you bring them downstairs. The morticians would actually go on call. They would carry out buckets of blood. Embalming could be done on the go, or they would be taken to a funeral home in the later 1900s. But it was still a very formal process. The grieving would take couple days. Some people would lay out for 3-4 day funerals. Like, we had these extensive funerals. You could touch your loved one. It wasn't seen as a biohazard. And now it's very sanitized. You can't even retrieve the remains from the hospital or wherever they passed until a pronouncement is made. And so they formally pronounce the person as deceased, and then they have the death certificate signed by a doctor. Then you can pick them up. So now when they're picked up, you have someone come with gloves, and embalmers used to not wear gloves even during embalming, like
Really?
straight up touching inside the human body. We were not thinking of people as that. We were just like, oh, that's a deceased person. Now, I would advocate for wearing gloves while embalming, but at bedside, that person was just having their hands kissed. And now we're putting on gloves, we're putting on aprons, we're putting on hairnets, we have full PPE, and we're treating it like a disposal service. In fact, bodies are taken out by the dumpster at most hospitals, if not all hospitals. So there will be a ramp that's for garbage or deliveries from the trucks that are coming in, and the human remains are taken out on the same lifts. It is not reverent at all. And I think we could get to a point in society where it would be okay to walk the person out the front door and everyone say, okay, but because it's a hospital, I guess they don't want people knowing. But, people die. It doesn't mean that the hospital is not good.
Yeah.
So we've definitely moved away and sanitized death. We don't want to see it. We have a stranger contracted, they pick them up. We can ID with a camera on FaceTime or a photograph, say, yes, that's my loved one. They cremate them, put them in a black box, and that's it. They die alone. Before we had people die in our homes. Now we put people in nursing homes. We don't want the end of life to even happen in our household. So we're talking about the paranormal and how we perceive ghosts. The person dies in a nursing home now. And everyone always says, oh, so-and-so lived there and they died in the house. We don't even let that happen now. And
No.
I think about how many people, if you believe that human spirits are what we're interacting with, that's a whole other conversation.
Sure.
But,
We'll get to that.
but in the concept of ghost stories and the way we perceive what ghosts are in historically, I really think things have changed. And where we see that change was mainly 1963. So we have these big reverent funerals, and then JFK is assassinated, and everyone's like, that's what I want for dad. This beautiful, amazing funeral. And it's such a big reverent display of what someone's transition, rite of passage into the afterlife is. And at the same time, a woman named Jessica Midford put out a book called The American Way of Death, and how the American funeral industry is actually capitalizing on grief, and that we should not be trusting these funeral directors with our money. So we have this discourse going on, like, I want what JFK had, that's the American way. But then we have, they're just making money off of you. That same year, the Catholic Church says, you know how we said it was a sin to get cremated? We're now going to let you have funeral services with cremated remains in the church, because before, cremated remains were not even permitted in the Catholic Church.
Really?
That's where we start to see this decline. And more, it becomes this idea of funerals are an expense. Everything's an upcharge. They're upselling. They're making commission. Let me tell you, there are a lot of funeral directors who are making $30,000 a year. The funeral home may profit, but these funeral directors are not in the business of upselling you, upcharging you, capitalizing on your grief. It's a service. But because of the things that have been put out about it, people say, oh, we'll take care of it ourselves. And particularly in COVID is where you see the biggest changes, because people were putting off the funeral till COVID was over. We're gonna take care of dad's service in 4 months or 3 months, and then all of a sudden it became a year, and then they're like, what's the point now? And then these people never got a send off. And so if we never had a send off for dad, why are we going to have one for mom? And that's where I think we're really getting to this point where a lot of people are directly cremated, including young people. Almost all of my young friends that have passed away in the past year, and I have lost a lot of people couple of years,
Jeez.
I would say at least a dozen people in the
Are you
past 10 years.
serious? Oh
Yeah,
no.
I talk to people and they're like, that's not normal. And I'm like, I
That
don't know.
that
Like,
is a lot.
I grew up in a small town and there wasn't a lot to do. And a lot of people, they took different paths in life, and it got them in those directions. And it's a real shame, but a lot of them, I didn't get to see them. And I always mentally prepare myself. I'm like, I'm going to see them laying in a casket, but it was an urn. And I'm like, that's my friend in that urn. But
Right.
that's where services are. And it's for the family, it's for the parents. But as friends, I've experienced a lot where I'm like, he wouldn't want to be on this like DVD montage of someone walking through the forest with these photos of him where he's like the most professional he's ever looked in his life. He was a hippie. Like, this is, so
Right.
I think that the discord between what funeral services provided and what the person actually was has really become separate. We're giving people mass cards with, Jesus on them, for people who are atheist, and it's because that's what the funeral home offers. And anytime it's a product, it doesn't feel authentic to people. So
Right.
I think there's a happy medium. I think there could be room for the funeral industry to do better, but they have to be more human. And unfortunately, to navigate all of that grief, that trauma, everything you're picking up vicariously, you got to shut yourself off a little bit. And that was one of my first apprehensions joining the industry. When I was working in it, I was like, I don't know if I don't want to feel anything when someone tells me someone died.
Right, right. I feel like the whole thing about like, well, you're gonna have to like deaden yourself, deaden your emotions, to become a surgeon. I'm like, I don't know, is that the best
Yeah.
route? I mean, obviously you have to develop like a callus, to not let it affect your job, because you have to do a job to save someone's life, or in your former case, to help send someone off. But yeah, to turn off the emotions, that seems unrealistic too.
Yeah. If children are dying, like I've cried on transfers, and I'm like trying to hide it because that's the number one thing. You don't cry in front of these people. I'm like,
Right.
I'm watching a little old lady tell her husband, see you soon, as we take him away. That's
Oh.
going to make me cry. It's midnight. I just got out of bed for this.
Yeah, I am not equipped to deal with that. I'm telling you, I'd be a puddle. I'm too emotionally weak. But
Yeah.
I have to, just because I'm so curious, and I know you've probably been asked this a million times, but I want to ask you, like, how did you get into the paranormal, and also kind of this interest in death and dying? I guess I don't know if that was an early interest for you, but I'm curious on how, where this, where your interest came from and how it's developed and evolved.
So I always say this, but it sounds like my life story is made up. I grew up in an antique store. So my parents and I live upstairs, and we have a bunch of dead people stuff downstairs. And every weekend we're going to homes of the recently deceased and sifting through their belongings. And there were instances where my mom says, I know that lady was like watching me go through her stuff. So like there was definitely an element of invasiveness about that, but it got me interested in history in the past. But it wasn't until 2009 that I had my first like in my face paranormal experience. And I was actually going to school to study pre-veterinary biology. So I'm doing lab work, and I go to my lab on Monday after experiencing it was just this blue ball of light in a cemetery, and it came in
Whoa.
between, like it changes directions 90 degrees. Wind stops. There's nothing going on. It's not shining on a surface. It's free floating. And I'm open to this being debunked. People could say it's ball lightning, whatever. But in the moment, when a blue sphere is coming towards you and both you and a friend jump in opposite directions and it comes in between you and goes into the ground, it changes everything. I'm like,
Yeah.
what was that? What was it? And we really just got kind of consumed by it. So I went to school the next. How do you go back to your regular life after you
Right.
experience something like that? And I asked my biology Dr. Major, bless him. I was like, do you believe in ghosts? And he was like, that stuff's not real. And I said, no, I saw something. Like I saw something this past weekend. It's real. And so I became consumed with it. I was out until like 3 or 4 in the morning. Ghost hunting. I definitely didn't know what I was doing. I had an idea of what the scientific process should look like, but I didn't know how to blend those two things and areas of knowledge to basically recreate what I experienced. And it never happened. So I was showing up, rolling up in sweatpants with a Red Bull, coming to class tired, falling asleep. And it's like, what are you doing? And it's like, I'm not even doing anything exciting. I'm going out and sitting on train tracks where someone said a ghost train came through, trying to feel something and breaking into the old college buildings. And, you know, I do miss that era of the naivety and just wanting something. And there was a ghost on campus. His name was the Lounge Lizard, and he I guess came to the desks and put his fists on the desk in front of women. So we would break into those buildings after hours trying to contact the Lounge Lizard.
Hell
just
yes.
like I said, just chasing that experience. And really, I've never seen anything like that so tangibly. We have equipment, we have all these things that foster these experiences, but that was the one thing where I'm like, someone else saw it.
Yeah.
It was right there. It didn't shine on a surface. It was free floating. And maybe it was ball lightning, but how did it change direction? How did it come towards me? So I hold on to this story for so long. And finally, I start to realize maybe that wasn't dangerous. Maybe that was something else. My cousin was actually killed at the entrance of that cemetery. And like
Whoa.
literally the entrance. When he was 11 years old, we loved him. It was really traumatic for the family. So as I get older and I start navigating this field, I'm like, wait a minute. What if that was him? And that's why it happened. Like cemeteries aren't typically haunted, but what if he was like, what's up? You know, like you're here. And so I finally open up, what, 15 years later to my aunt, and I tell her, you know, we thought that maybe that was him saying hello. And she said, Larry has shown up to us as blue butterflies all the years. And I was like, this is why I do this stuff. This is what it's about. Like the fact that it was a blue orb and the blue butterflies. And I was like, and they're open to the idea of him being able to connect in this way. And I was like, incredible, perfect. And that was really like my, you know, segue into it. But I wouldn't say I was an investigator at that point. I was just like, it was an interest. And I think it was a hot time to be into it. 2009,
Right.
A lot of people seemed to be picking up the interest back then. When my friend passed away in 2018, it was really hard for me. She was like this cheerleader person, and she was like, I love everything you do. You sell vintage clothes. That's so cool. You like My Little Pony, like 80s My Little Pony. She liked everything about me that other people would say was cringe or like out of character. I don't care about those things. I don't care about like this identity. And when she passed, it was kind of like, wow, we can really let the best ones go. Like they didn't just slip right through our hands. And I started attending mortuary school after that. And at every single day, I just thought, if I fail, I'm going to let that person down, because I know she would be so into this and so proud. And I ended up graduating 4.0 summa cum laude, and I was like, this is my path. I am a career girl now. I am going to take everything so seriously. And, you know, you're taught death is this irreversible cessation of life. Dead is dead. People who are dead don't come back. And there's nothing else. But then your dean of your mortuary college is telling you paranormal stories and experiences. And then you start being an embalmer in Connecticut, where everyone believes in ghosts, and they say, hey, you like haunted stuff, go here. So on my 2 days off working in the pandemic, I just started exploring the new places. I couldn't make friends, but I could post on the internet, and that was socially distant. So I was going to these haunted cemeteries and haunted places and the sites of legends and all of this stuff that was right there, because New England is very old and everyone loves ghosts up there. So it really just kind of catapulted me. And I remember telling my friend, I was like, I don't think I want my identity to be paranormal investigator. I kept saying, it is said that this place is haunted, like my public persona. And this was like 2020. So I would say, it is said there's a spirit. It is said, but I wasn't saying it. And then one day I was just like, no, I'm saying it. I experienced something there, or I believe something's there. And I'm not saying any place is like definitely haunted or not, but I had an experience there, and I believe in ghosts, and I'm allowed to say this. So it's been a process. It's been a challenge. There's been conflicting eras of my life, but ultimately I was like, okay, I'm not going to escape this, because I was just doing like telling the stories, but then people who were paranormal investigators were asking me to come, you know, investigate with them, and I'm sitting there like, why do I keep getting pulled to this? So I feel like I didn't have a choice. It just kept pulling me back in.
Yeah, it found you. It recruited you. That's incredible. I want to ask, because it seems like you almost brought it up because when you first started going out to cemeteries, is this because, folks, I'm sure you all know Beckie-Ann is a massive presence on TikTok. You have like 10 bazillion followers and your videos are so good. I'm not like I don't use TikTok a lot, but I was in preparation for this, I was going through your videos and I have a couple questions based on that. One, was this something that kind of gradually happened? Like you're like, I'm going to get involved in TikTok and start posting my stuff there, and then eventually, hopefully, I build a following. And two, did you have production experience? Because I find your videos like very. I come from like the TV movie world, and I find your production value very good, like really, really good. And you're very editing is so hard, and you're a very good editor.
So transparently, my first TikToks are cringe and embarrassing, to answer your question. And I see them and I was like, how are people watching this? No, I never set out to have a following. And that is the number one thing that is so difficult about being taken seriously. Is everyone's like, she did it because she wanted to get popular on the internet. Oh no, I moved to a new area where I had no friends. I thought I was posting for my people from home. I thought I was posting to the 3,000 people that followed me on Instagram.
Right.
I thought that people that were seeing this would just be, a couple people. I thought I'd hit 5,000 followers on TikTok like I did on Instagram. And it was just my journey. It was, I'm sad today and it's a pandemic and we're not going to get a big Halloween. So I'm going to go to Salem in the middle of summer and just look at the old houses and the stories. And it got 500,000 views. And I was like, well, then I've been to the Hocus Pocus filming locations. What if I made a cute video? And then people started tagging me and they said, have you seen My Bloody Galentine? She's this account that shares these haunted locations and these Atlas Obscura locations. And back then I still consider myself like a follower. Like I wasn't like a leader. I wasn't in my own voice. I was just making these like, I don't even know how to replicate what I was doing, but it was like, what happened to the lost children of the Alleghenies? Like it was like this whispery, spooky voice, but people were like, I love this. This is like ASMR. And they're like, I love that you're telling these creepy stories, but you're not being creepy about it. It's like Anna Faris telling me a ghost story. Like they really liked it. And within 3 months, I was on the Pittsburgh CBS News, and I was not this person. I was like, I'm Morticia telling ghost stories, and like I would probably cringe. I don't ever look back on that interview, but I was just like, I had my pumpkins in the background and my like little pumpkin shirt, and I'm like, I don't know what's going on, and then I was like, wow, I got on the news. That's the biggest this is ever going to get. And then TikTok calls me and they're like, we love that you're making these little documentaries. People don't think of it as a dancing platform. We love you. Can you talk to this other news source? So then I was on the Western Mass News and they're showing all these places and they're talking about ghost stories. And I started doing more and more podcasts and I started doing all of these things. And I kept thinking, this is the biggest it's going to get. And this is the biggest it's going to get. And then all of a sudden you're in the Daily Mail and people are like, I saw you in the Daily Mail. And I'm like, what is happening with my life?
It's shocking.
Yeah. And it's like, I always think I wasn't doing anything different than anyone else. But at the same time, people are saying we've heard these stories before, but we like the way you tell them.
Yep.
Now I've moved away from, I would always say my content was almost BuzzFeedy in the beginning. It was like, welcome to this haunted place, blah, blah, blah. Here's the facts. And now it's like, hey guys, you're coming with me. And I've really worked on just like being an identity and someone who is just showing people my daily life and how I live. And that seems to be the most compelling. They're like, whoa, like this is how it is. And I think it feels a little more authentic and people have really, it has resonated a bit more. So the past few years have been even more wild than ever.
I mean, I see why though, like a lot of these, videos on YouTube or Instagram or TikTok or whatever, like kind of the short form format for, this type of content. I do feel like people are putting on like these airs and some of it's great. It's appealing, but like you really like have this like fun aspect and also very positive where, a lot of people are adding sinister elements to like, jazz it up a little bit.
Yeah.
But it just seems I can totally understand why so many people are so fond of your TikToks because there is a real like good energy, positivity about it. It's like, hey, let's go on an adventure and have some fun today.
Yeah, and a lot of people have told me that I've changed the way they thought about ghosts and haunted objects because it hasn't been like that. And that I won't say it never was, because I was going to some of these like places that are allegedly, sinister, and
Yeah.
and at first I was using the creepy music. And then someone commented a video at one point and said, it this video is all I need to know that ghosts are real. And then it hits you and it's like, we are changing the way young people are viewing the paranormal and the afterlife, and we need to act like it. Like,
Yeah.
have some decency, have some respect. I would never feel comfortable misleading people, and I think it's created a really big level of trust, even down to like the objects that people send me. That is like a new thing. It was like a snowball of people just sending me stuff. And I'm like, this is what this person said about this. This is as much as I can give you. I don't need to embellish things.
Hmm.
I don't need for anything to happen. I've been to some of the most famous haunted locations like 5 times and nothing happened. And I'm never going to lie for views. It's just, this is exactly as it is. And even then, that still has my bias. And I look back at some things that I've presented and I'm like, maybe that wasn't exactly as that was, but now I know that, and I'll go back and edit and adjust accordingly.
Right. Yeah. You get new information and things change. And that's also a very, I think, admirable thing. It's like, he's like, hey, I was wrong about this. And let me tell you what I found out and what, the correction is. I think that's, people are so afraid to like look wrong or look stupid. But I think, and you don't look stupid to me. People look intelligent when they go back and say, "Hey, I actually got some interesting new information, and I was incorrect about that." I think that's great. I think that's so wonderful. One thing I do want to ask you, I'm super curious because I've made my living as an actor for like 18 years. And when I first started like doing TV and stuff, you get recognized every once in a while, maybe in the airport, but it was never like super invasive. And there is like, I think in the old timey world of TV and movies, there is definitely a separation from your audience, which I think I personally probably enjoyed. It was kind of nice where if people didn't like your stuff, well, they couldn't really tell you,
Yeah.
unless it was like, leaked on YouTube. But I want to ask you, like, because you are a very big presence, you are a celebrity for all intents and purposes. And how, what is that like? Because people have such access to you, and there's not really like the barrier like there is in TV and film. And is that a difficult thing to navigate?
I actually talk about this, and I've been opening up. So I'm in my blossoming era of I stayed quiet, and now I think people need to recognize what it's like. So last week I did an ad. It was contracted for a pretty big podcast. So they paid for views. So I'm reaching new people on this promotional content, and people are saying, "Tell your teeth they don't need to stay that far apart. Your nose holes are freaking me out. I hate
What?
your nose." And I shouldn't be able to read that, especially not on an ad, but it's coming to my personal social media because my public is my personal. There's no private Becky. Everything you
Right.
see is who I am. And unfortunately, this is one of the most complicated, I think, eras of existence because people say, "Oh, you're the new TV people, you're the new people that are entertaining in this field." But at the same time, there's a level of this that is chaotic.
Yeah.
Everything's read into, everything's shade, everything, there's drama. And it's like, I'm just trying to share this little thing that I like. I never thought that, my relationships with my dead friends would be speculated upon, for example. That's like something I've talked about
What?
recent. Oh yeah. There's a whole conspiracy theory that I stole my dead friend's identity to date her boyfriend. And
Oh, that is ridiculous.
yeah, and I'm like, no, I changed my appearance when she died because she died and I didn't want to do the things we were doing when we were friends anymore. And if you scroll back about 3 years, you can see all the comments she left on myself. But that is the level of misinterpretation that people will get to. And everything is wrong. And because you have access, unlike TV, if you go on and you do something, and let's say everything that you've been on, not everyone has got along, right? Like there
Mm-hmm.
has been
Oh yeah.
like little things that go on
Most
behind the
definitely.
scenes, and there are filmings that you can't wait till they end.
Yep.
But then it ends when it ends. But with social media, everyone says, how did that go? Oh, that went so bad because of this, and she's the bad person. And if you set boundaries, that is like the worst thing that is happening to me right now. Is I believe that we should be able to set boundaries. And
Yeah.
if you have a certain space in my life where you don't belong, you have disrespected me in some way, or and I'm not a harsh person, but I should be able to set a boundary. And people are now like, she bullied me because she blocked me.
What?
Okay, no, I blocked you because of some reason, like a tangible reason that I didn't like. And I don't care about copying, I don't care about any of the frivolous internet stuff, but it's just people who feel like they should have 100% access to you because you're showing up on social media, you're public, you're out there. That means you want these opinions. And it's like, I want opinions on the paranormal. I want opinions on the stuff that I'm talking about. But when you become a content creator, what you're putting out is synonymous with you. I am the messenger for the information I'm sharing. It doesn't mean dig into this. Would you go to your local coffee shop and find every single person that never got along with the barista their entire life and try to get them fired? No, but content creators, it's like, yeah, guess what? I have bad days. I've had days where I've barked at people and been not the most kind
Sure.
person, but I also have very strong convictions and morals, and I know exactly who I am. And people will try to tell you you are not who you say you are over and over again.
That is awful. I mean, like, how do you stay? I mean, that would really be have an effect on me. You're a very strong person, but how do you stay positive? Because, like, like, how do you, like, I guess, how do you cope with this and then still, like, because that's heavy, especially when it's coming at you 24/7 all the time, all the time.
Yeah.
And you have a big body of work out there, so there's probably people commenting all the time. And I'm hoping most of it is good, positive stuff. But, like, like you said, there is some detritus in there. Like, how do you stay sane and positive?
I don't care if people say, like, when an anonymous person says, I don't like that you have Ouija boards in your house because they're portals to demons. I don't care. And when
Mhm.
people say ghosts aren't real, I don't care. And when people don't like my nose, I don't care. Plenty of people do like it. Like, there's so much. There's people that are like, you've had nose jobs. I'm like, I've had the same nose since I was a kid.
And also,
And
who cares if you
it,
did?
I've
I mean,
learned
like, that's crazy.
those don't matter. Those aren't real. I have 1 million people between TikTok and Instagram. If I even take 1% of those people and say they hate me and they follow me because they hate me or they want to say something rude, that's 10,000 people. So that's 10,000 people and that's 1% of my audience. So I have to let people do that. And sometimes I respond and this lady said you need to learn how to contour, and I responded and I said I'm not going to insult your appearance back, but I just want you to know that, like, we can see these comments and read them. But it's not, we're not numb, we're not invincible. And it's just continuous stuff like that where I just have learned to shut it down. What I'm
Good.
dealing with now is like, someone had a bad experience with me 4 years ago, and someone had a bad experience with me recently. And again, you're not for everyone. I don't know anyone who has a perfect reputation and has never offended someone. It's because they project things onto you. Like, there's people that'll say, oh, she went here on purpose to bother me. No, I just went there because I was driving through. And with that, it is like it's hard not to imagine it as this like huge pile of people that just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And you have to let them lie. You have to let people lie about you. You have to allow yourself to relax and not defend yourself. You have to let them be wrong and understand
Right.
that those people who are wrong about you, they wanted to be wrong about you. The
Yeah.
second, if someone, for people who probably don't have discernment, when someone comes to you and says, my Bloody Galentine is the worst person I've ever met. She's so rude, and she is homophobic or something. Like, people go, oh, I knew there had to be something wrong with her. And it's like,
Oh,
but you can look historically of me advocating for people and speaking out about injustices my entire life. And I would say I lean a very, loud way about how I feel about things
right.
and marginalized communities. And I've used my platform to put money into these, causes. And still, they will commit to misunderstanding you just because you had to do someone dirty to get that many followers. That's how they see it.
That is not how the world works. And I mean, you almost like at a certain point, you kind of, I almost feel sorry for people who, I mean, obviously, you know, and like I'm not a psychologist, but like it seems the root of a lot of this is jealousy of your position, and that's just like a sad way for jealousy to manifest, is to criticize people about their appearance or about their content. Like, just don't say anything at all. It's not that hard.
They can't help it. They
No.
can't. And that's another thing is I was the ugly kid growing up. Like I was overweight, like I was bullied every day. I recently opened up about that I was called the F slur every single day in school. And the teachers, the people who are supposed to protect us, they didn't. And they didn't say, "Hey, don't say that. That's a hate crime." Like they
Right.
just they felt that way too because we looked different than we were obviously, you know, whatever. But I recently started speaking up about this kind of stuff, and it's just you have to let go of it. You have to let it be wrong. But the problem is growing up being bullied will make you feel like I'm this is what everyone has always said about
Right.
me, is I'm the ugly one, I'm the, you know, and I'm the weird one. I was always weird, like even in high school, Becky's so weird, like nobody would ever want to date her because that's the only valuable thing about people, is if you're dateable or not. And when I started to, you know, see a therapist about all of this, and if you have 1 million followers online, you need a therapist.
Yeah.
I realized like some people just are jealous, and some people will just make something up because that's the only way they can be connected to you. If they feel like you're getting away with them, like we talk a lot about the crabs in the bucket, and, you know, and what that means. Oh, don't get away from us. They'll take everything. And I've been cut so deeply by people that I'm friends with for 4 years, and they're going to go back to a text message I sent 3 years ago, take it out of context and make it look a certain way. So you just have to go, you know what? Some people are jealous. You're allowed to feel and say that. It's not dismissive to know and believe that. And some people will just lie. And that is something, like, I always grew up that I never lied, and I still never lie. You will never catch me lying. Like when people say, "Hey Becky, I was hurt that you said this and I didn't think it was okay." I'll say, "Yeah, I did say that and I shouldn't have said it." Like
Right.
I have nothing to fear from the things that I said. And I'm not going to say every single moment in my life is becoming or perfect, but I think, you know, that, and on top of that, we have the paranormal community that's like, you guys are just influencers and you're not serious, you're not investigators. It's like these two things coming together, and it's like you can't win. You don't have a safe space. And
No.
it's unfortunate it needs to be that way.
Oh man, the downside to successes. I mean, it's so tragic because it does not have to be this way. And I can't tell if it's like a new phenomenon of like people like acting out in this like irrational way. Like, because I mean, you know, there's always been critics of film and critics of TV, but they're usually professionals writing for you know, journalists.
But they have guidelines, right?
Yeah,
Because
totally.
they can only say certain things. They can't just go and say all of these things about your appearance
Right.
or whatever, or everything that you've done wrong. And I'm going to tell you right now, every single content creator that I know that is very successful, who has, let's say, more than 100,000 followers, they get one. Every single person I know has a person that they met once, and then that person relentlessly tried to cancel them for like months and months after. And I don't know anyone who hasn't had one. And they're like, I don't know why this person won't stop. And they'll post stories and they'll tag you, and they'll turn people against you, and people watch it happen. And finally, I am at the point where if you're amusing this kind of behavior for anyone, not just against me, I don't participate in it. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's like critics that have access to you, critics where nothing is off the table, critics who can say she's rude, she's this. They use inflammatory phrases. So something that's like meanness now becomes abuse. So like, she was mean to me, she abused me. I'm not saying people say that, but there probably are people who say that.
Right. Oh God. Well, you know, I'm happy that it seems like you've found a way to keep some sort of semblance of balance and, you know, hopefully happiness. Because like,
Yeah.
no one deserves this. Even if you're a horrible person, I don't think people deserve this. I really don't. I don't think it. You know, it's so awful. It's so counterproductive.
Yeah,
And
I've actually said that. I always tell people, even if you did do the worst thing that they accuse you of, nobody deserves to be like stalked, harassed, monitored,
no,
embarrassed, shamed. They thrive in shaming people. And you know, I saw someone who spoke up in a situation on TikTok recently, and he's like, people are looking for dirt on my life because I spoke up about this. And then he's like, here's everything I've ever done in my life that's dirty, and then like just list it off, and it before people have an opportunity to find it, because everyone is human. You want to tell me that there's a person that you know that has never done anything a little rude, a little shady, misinformed, misguided? Like it's unbelievable, but it's new. We just started this 4 years ago. TikTok
yeah,
is new. This idea of it was one thing to exist behind images, and then it's like, oh, it's pictures. But when you're seeing these videos and you feel connected to these people, and so I'm learning what the boundaries are. I'm learning how to navigate it. And one of those things, unfortunately, is other people who are content creators that are aiming, they will say, oh, these big creators don't support us. And this is what happens when you do. I want to share my platform. You know how many people I put directly in feed on my platform because I want people to follow them, and I don't care. Like, this community is for all of us. And unfortunately, there are a few people that they just kind of sabotage it.
yeah. Well, that's I have a feeling they're not very happy people to begin to begin with. But
No, that's what I always say. Nothing is worse than living in that mind,
oh
and
yeah,
living in that mindset and feeling jealousy, because I
yeah,
don't feel that way about other people. And you know, you really have to let them go, and you look at it and you go side by side, and it's like, this is a reflection of what they think they are somehow owed. And it's like, no, people ask me to do things because I am the only person who is a former like mortician that's talking about these things in the
right.
paranormal space. So that's who they go to when they have these questions. And you know, there are other people. I have met people who are morticians that are in the paranormal space, but you know, this is the only place you get this exact conversation.
Right.
And so to somehow try and compare that because you think the content is similar, I could quit making content tomorrow. I'm still going to have the things that I do. And, you know, out of all of this, I love what I'm doing. I love it. You know,
Good.
like my friend, you know, Ryan Matthew Cohn sent me these dolls he thinks are haunted, and now they're published in his new book that's coming out, and his whole firsthand account of that. And those dolls are in my house. I'm like, I have haunted dolls that are now the firsthand account is published in a book that's probably going to be a bestseller with these people. Everyone knows about them, and they're in my house. I love that. I love looking at them. I love wondering about them. I love like going to places. I love telling the stories. I love raising funds for these. You know, we just did crowdfunding for John Mills, who he has Alex Brienne Corp, and he's a Black man who does research without pay into the lives of the enslaved. And it's like, if I could help use my platform to pay him in some way or get people to follow him, and we did that. And I'm like, this is why I'm here. So you
Yeah.
could take half of my following away and convince them that I'm a bad person, but I'm still going to be sitting here fighting for these things that I care about. And unfortunately, if the paranormal doesn't make you happy, which I would say there are people here who aren't here because they're happy, and if the, you know, the experiences that really invigorate you don't make you happy, that's where you're going to be. But because it doesn't matter how much is thrown at me, because I'm happy to be doing what I'm doing.
Bravo. I love that. Amen. Amen. I'm not a religious man, but I'm gonna I agree. If it doesn't make you happy, if you're not getting something out of it, like, then why do it? Like, just get lost. I want to ask you, because I really find your level of concern and respect for the dead fascinating, and you seem to have like a really unique perspective, especially like, you know, coming from the paranormal community where most people are kind of solely concerned about interacting with the paranormal manifestations, which obviously there's nothing wrong with that. I am too. But your take seems like it's different and it kind of important in a different way. And would you mind sharing some of your views about the dead and what happens to the remains, and like the respect and grieving process? Because I've heard you talk about this over, you know, on some of your videos. I go, that's a really unique way to look at this stuff.
Um, this kind of stuff is the reason some people are mad at me, but I don't think we should be using human remains as decor, for one, and I think it's gone under the radar. So
Mm-hmm.
that's one feeling that I have. I think that people deserve to be respected and remembered, and yes, they're dead, but One thing I've been talking about a lot recently is, even though I don't have photos of my ancestors, I don't have my ancestors' belongings, but I own a lot of things that are someone's ancestors' belongings. And caring for that is access to this, the space. I was watching a lecture recently and it all clicked for me, but he was talking about how maybe you don't have access to your ancestors' gravestones, but you can clean up someone in your community, whether it be a church, if it's an African American burial ground, whatever your community is. And caring for ancestors, even if they're not your own, still allows you to care for your ancestors in a way, because you're caring for your ancestors' communities. So down like this, that clicked for me, because I was like, wow, what a profound thing. That's why I love these photos of people I'll never know, or people who are related to people I'll never know. And it just feels like, it was someone.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people throw out antique photos, and that's the only connection to the earth that person had, and it didn't even have a name on the back, and you threw it away and painted the frame white to make some artwork. Or that this is really a hot take, but I don't think people should be altering Victorian portraits of people. Like, you can see behind me, I have these pictures of these little girls, and people will put like creepy things on them, skulls and bats, and gouge an eye out. And for me, I'm like, that was someone, and that's all that's left of that. So it's like a window to the past. But it is typically my feelings on human remains that have people up in arms. And maybe I'm harsh, maybe it's not my place to say, maybe we all just turn to dust and it doesn't matter. But what people are missing in the context that matters is that my preceptor was tough on me. Her name is Amanda King. She is probably the best reconstructive artist in the mortuary field right now. She is really up there with the greats. She travels, she lectures on color theory, and you did not leave the funeral home until the body was perfect, was ready. You did not cut corners. Everything had to be exactly right. It had to be done with the right flick of the wrist and the touch of the thumb. Like, every person had to be as best as you could get. And that doesn't mean perfect. People get sick, and
Sure.
that's hard. But you had to, especially when it came to infants, we had to exhaust every single resource. And that instilled in me that everyone is worth the time of day. And I'm telling you this as someone who went home and made a burial onesie for a fetus that was found in a sewer. And I'm telling you, like, I believe everyone deserves dignity and respect. And we think about that easily when we talk about our community, but we fail to remember or notice that there are so many African American burial grounds that are now and there's not just African American, that's like one aspect of it, but any of these, even Jewish burial grounds, these historic burial grounds that are ignored compared to the traditional ones.
Right.
That the white Catholic cemeteries are perfectly maintained, and that's not desecration. And it comes from these laws, which was back in the 1800s. You weren't allowed to desecrate human remains. Like, there were protections for people, but if you were enslaved, you could do whatever you wanted. And that's where all of these human remains that are retired medical specimens are coming from, that people are posing with for pictures on Instagram and making memes about. And they'll tell you, no, it's not, educate yourself. There's a study that I posted about, and I'm sure that you saw this one, but I talked about how the Oddfellows skeletons that everyone seems to compartmentalize as ethically sourced specimens, they're human remains, they're not specimens.
Right.
More than half of them came from China, from people who were enslaved, people who were indigenous. They were robbing burial mounds. They were robbing, hospitals. That's the other thing. Even if they weren't people who were enslaved, they were disadvantaged in the population in some way. That's how it's described. So they were going to these asylums, and they were taking people, and they were using people who were already considered marginalized in some way, and using them to elevate the knowledge of people who are privileged. And now you're comfortable having that in your house and making jokes about it. And I do feel very strongly about that. I think everyone deserves dignity. I think we should repatriate remains. I think consent is important. And I don't even know if that necessarily plays into the paranormal. I just think we should care about it. And my preceptor cares about it a lot. And that's one person I've talked to about this. We had a huge scandal last year, and everyone kind of caught wind of it, which was someone who was trusted to care for human remains and worked in a facility that dealt with anatomical donations, was actually allowing oddities dealers to come in and decide what body parts they wanted to cut off and selling them to them. And they got caught by the federal government, and he got probation for that. And he's
Probation.
back. Yeah. They were making candles from human fat.
Oh, what?
Yeah, and it's
That's
in the
dark,
news,
man.
and they still have supporters. And I spoke out about it, and I said, you understand that even if you're not burning these, they're toxic. Fat cannot be embalmed; it can only be seared off. So there's no preservation for the fat in human remains. So that means if you're making candles out of human fat, that's toxic. Even if it just gets a little warm, even if you're not lighting it, it's carcinogens. And they don't care about you; they're caring about profiting. What started as a very good venture, which was sci-fi show Oddities that came out about a decade ago. I know the people behind that. They were actually taking retired medical remains, and they wanted to find them homes. It did not start out the way it did, but it ended in this way where a lot of the skeletons, a lot of the skulls in people's collections, they're going overseas. They don't have perpetual care like we do. So what happens is after 15 years or 30 years, whatever contract they have, they put all the remains in a commingled community remains. So everybody after 15 to 30 years is now in a site where there's just kind of bones in a community grave, and people are stealing those, or they put them in an ossuary, which is just like kind of a housing for it, so they're not actually buried. People are stealing those remains and selling them to people over here. That's how this whole thing got flagged. So again, there's a lack of consent. And for me personally, I think consent matters. I don't care if you died 8,000 years ago. I don't care I think if you have, Egyptian mummy remains, send them back. Find out where they go and send them back. I think every single, like I said, person belongs with their community. We think about the people who have the shrunken heads. There were tourist trade ones, but there's a lot of them that aren't, and they kind of get sold on, everyone says the black market, but there is like an underground area, and a lot of this happens in a Facebook group, which is like the Oddities Facebook group. There's and they sell these remains. And at first, like I said, it was genuinely a school has a skeleton in a closet and they're selling that. I don't know if I necessarily have a huge issue with that until they figure out a perfect answer. But I do have an issue with you actually digging someone up for profit.
Yeah, I think that's crazy. It's a crazy thing to do. It's awful.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. First of all, I just want to say I am learning a lot tonight. This is really
Yeah, you
really
can think
interesting
about
to me.
this, and you can think about these people, and that's one of the reason I did speak out about someone a few weeks ago. This is where I started bullying people, and I just said I don't think that we should use what would likely be someone who was enslaved or came from an asylum or was sick in some way, because they also weirdly went to like hospitals as like tuberculosis, like Spanish flu, like they were getting in those burial grounds. And I said, I just don't think that this is the answer. And they're like, you're a bully. Like, I don't know. I don't think it's a hot take to think that human remains aren't props. There's plenty of really great replicas that we have, but I was laughing with a friend yesterday actually, and I was like, I think it's actually way more tough and creepy to say, I actually am unaffected by human remains. I don't find them to be creepy.
Right.
And the fact that you think that shock value is where it belongs tells me you're immature in some ways, because we all die. But I want to get to a point where death is seen as not something that we need to hide. People say they pass away. Oh, don't ask about them. Their dad died,
Right.
like you keep it quiet. I think it should be something in the open. We should go back to wearing pins. There's a store on Instagram, Shop Calma, and she sells these pins that say I'm mourning or I'm grieving. And I think that is something we should do. That's how it used to be. They wore full mourning clothes to let people know this is where I'm at in my grief. And it's not one size fits all. In the Jewish community, they do grieve still in those ways. So they have the first 30 days, they have the first year, and in the first year, you're not supposed to go to concerts, and there's so many applications of it, but we've removed that to the point where we don't want to know. You get 3 days off work if the closest person in your life died. Your wife dies, your brother dies, something like that, and you get 3 days off work and you have to return and you come back and everyone's like, oh, don't say Like,
Yeah.
it,
Yeah, you're right. God.
yeah, it's a taboo, and I think it would be better if we could just talk about it in a way that it wasn't treated as like it, again, something that's uncomfortable. But they do say that humans experiencing sadness is the most difficult emotion to witness someone going through, and some people just don't want to look at it.
Yeah, yeah, it's really made me think. It's also like a the ancient Vedic tradition. Like their whole thing was life is about preparing for a good death, and I've always thought that that like puts me at ease, and for some weird reason, and I always like that. I want to ask you, and I'll explain what a psychopomp is to the listeners in case they don't know. But a psychopomp, which are creatures, spirits, angels, deities, whose responsibility is to escort newly deceased souls from Earth to the afterlife. And I couldn't help thinking when I was, preparing for this that you're not exactly a psychopomp, but you're sort of like a psychopomp in a way where you are like taking it's like a reverse psychopomp almost, like so you have someone's dead remains and you feel like, well, they're not just it's not just like garbage. This
Yeah.
should be respected. And I just thought it was to me it was interesting. I'm very fascinated by psychopomps and the relationship of death to the paranormal and even to UFOs and stuff like that. But I think what you're doing is really a positive thing, and also like I've never had this perspective, so it's just so interesting to me. Um,
What you mentioned actually makes me think about in my lecture, I talk about, uh, for example, the we would work with the Laotian funerals, and they would actually tie sheets to the casket and pull it through the parking lot to the retort, and the family would push the button themselves. Every single other culture mostly has this prescribed, um, almost like a book of what happens when you die, except for us in our
right,
chaotic Western view. And great, we allow every perspective, every view. We allow anyone to experience what they want. You have these pre-planning. So someone's going to pass away, and we make arrangements for what we want at our funeral. But at the same time, spiritually, we don't really have a code that happens. And these other cultures, it's like, oh well, Buddhists, they put coins in the mouth, and they're thinking
mm-hmm,
that's the afterlife. And I've been extremely fortunate to be trusted to work with Hindu, Buddhist, Laotian, Jewish funerals. I really got to see it all, and to be trusted with another culture and be guided by them as they're showing me. And I'm sitting here thinking, like, why are we the ones that I don't know what's going to happen if I die tomorrow? Everyone could have me in full Catholic mass, and I wouldn't know because I didn't plan it out.
right, right. Oh my gosh! So, like you just before we move off the subject of death, because I do find it so fascinating. You made a video, a TikTok. I don't know. Is calling it a video the wrong thing? I mean, it's a TikTok. Anyways, it was about death being a rite of passage,
Yes.
and death being discussed as a ritual. And could you explain a little bit about that? Because I thought that was absolutely fascinating.
So I think a lot of the trauma that we experience, the grief that we go through, is kind of oppressed onto us by our way that we view death as something that's a damage, right? Like it's something that is bad that has happened. But if we looked at death as a rite of passage, like a birthday or a wedding,
Mm-hmm.
what would the perspective be if we were like, yeah, Dave did the thing, like he
Right.
he got there, cool. And I'm not saying it would always be happy, it could still be reverent, but it could also be approached in a way that it's like they reached the final thing. And
Yeah.
instead it's like, yes, I'll miss them, that grief is there, but I think it becomes again like this closed off thing. We can't talk about it. And I've had people listen to my lecture and come up to me and say, I can finally say dead instead of passed away. I don't need to use the euphemism like, well,
Right.
she passed away. Like, and it's so awkward. Like,
It
we're the
is. It
only
is.
ones that say that. And, you know, it's how I felt. And a lot of it is, it's like this ritual that we're, it's more of a process than people even know, because there's biological, but there's no talk about spiritual. So when someone dies, we have the the organs shut off. The brain says, hey, body, shut down. And then all of the neurons stop firing, and then the organs stop functioning, and then the cells break down, and then they start, imploding, and then decomposition happens. And it's like, that's like 100 things have happened since you died, but nobody talks about, what about the spirit? Where does that go? We don't talk
Right.
about those things. And, it's very personal. It's a personal topic. And I've seen everyone from all aspects of life. I've seen someone pulled on a tractor to their graveside. And then I've seen other people that are like, what's the fastest we can get rid of this and dispose of this person? So, I mean, there are definitely instances where that is justified or appropriate. And so I would never speak over that. But I think that, we're getting closer and closer to death. And I think that I don't know, we got so scared of it for so long for whatever reason. When these wars happen, especially, we get these post-war societies where they're like, I don't want to talk about death anymore. We're scarred from this. And, I think we're seeing a little bit with COVID, because how many people got sick of talking about COVID? How many people are like, it's over, it's done with? And I think that also makes people, I don't want the negative. But if we stop seeing it as that negative space, if it's not held in our mind as a negative thing, I think we'd be better off.
Right. And sometimes the longer you ignore things, I'll use the example climate change. It's like no one wanted to talk about climate change. No one wanted to alter their lives and the comfort of their lives. But now here we are, and the bill is due. And, I mean, like, so so like not talking about things and ignoring things comes at the peril of the people who are ignoring it, kind of,
That's how complicated grief literally happens. They try to suppress it. You go back to work after 3 days and you don't talk about it because you don't want to upset anyone. And then it's like, we're a community. We look out for people. Like, we should care.
Yeah.
Like, you can be professional and still care that someone passed away. Like, I think that you should still have this, like, reverence for it, but also acknowledgement. And because it's become a hushed thing, then people struggle to get over it rather than talking about it openly and how they're feling about it.
Right. I wanted to run something by you, and not that you're going to have the answer, but I just wanted to see what your thoughts on it were. I'm a big UFO nerd, and love UFO history and studied it. Have you ever heard of Whitley Strieber?
Mm-mm.
He was like a pretty big UFO abductee, kind of like made the whole abduction thing famous in the mid-'80s. And he wrote this, New York Times bestseller. A movie was made, and he was getting just thousands of letters from abductees because they were telling him his story. And so his wife was kind of cataloging and, collating these stories. And one night she walks into Whitley's room and says, "Whitley, I think all of this has something to do with death." And I was like, that's an interesting thing, because and now, like, people are starting to talk about it. There's a great new book called Ecology of Souls, and it's relating UFOs to death and psychopomps and stuff like that. But like, I just wanted to, like, just, not that you have an answer or any thoughts about it, but like, what is that, like, call up for you, like the UFO abductions and UFOs having something to do with death? I mean, not that like that is the answer, but like, I just want to see if that grabbed you at all.
That's, I think you're just getting into the territory of, one, we have to analyze, did it happen or did it not happen? Was it psychological or was it transpiring in real time? And that's where you're going to have to look at that, because you have these people with these near-death experiences, right? And they go through all of that. And I can see how, you have this somatic release and all of the things, like I said, the biological processes of death, and you have people close to them. I would be interested in seeing the studies of people who are experiencing a very traumatic loss, who also have that connection that they shortly after have that, because you're sitting there hoping so bad, like something will pull you out of this universe or whatever you're going through. So I think there could be a connection. And again, this is coming from someone that, like, I'm absolutely, like, fascinated and interested in that, but I don't know how much of that is. I haven't seen any of that. For my knowledge, none of it ever happened, but
right.
But I also am open to the possibility, and think that like there's definitely a space for someone to like what's going to happen. Okay, let's say someone dies, right?
Right.
You know someone that died, and now you don't want to be here, so you're walking around like a little antenna, and you're thinking, I don't want to be here, I don't want to be here, I don't want to be here. And then, grief messes you up. You
Yeah.
dissociate. You're not in that realm anymore. Or something sees you and says, let's pull them out. Let's help. What if it's an act of compassion? They're like, they're struggling. Let's take them out of that universe for a second. Yeah, like you said, there's not really like an answer, but it would be an interesting topic to explore.
Yeah, it's just an interesting notion. So I remember reading that like as a kid, and I was like, "Whoa, that's heavy!" like, I do want to ask you. And first off, thank you so much for your time. But just a couple more questions, if that's okay.
Yeah, it's fine.
So like you are an investigator, and I'm curious because I'm kind of like I've done some investigating. I truly don't know what I'm doing when I'm out there. I'm usually just with I've joined a couple groups who seemingly know what they're doing, I guess. I don't know. But I want to like just kind of pick your brain and like find out about your approach. And I'm sure it's probably changed since you started doing it, but like current day, what is your approach when you go to investigate a haunted location or a place where high strangeness has occurred?
Yeah, that is true. That it did start out with you I was going to places where the map was already set out for me in the beginning, and that in itself is different because you already know, oh, everyone interacts with this spirit on this floor, and this person rolls a ball down the hallway, and like
Mm-hmm.
you're supposed to keep redoing everything. Like, how many times does that ball experiment? And what if the other investigator that was there 6 weeks ago is actually the person rolling the ball for you, and now you're affecting the future investigation because you're constantly reenacting this scenario, and there was never, I don't want to say any spirits named Little Timmy or something at all, but
Yeah.
and there's one in Trans Allegheny too. Not to call Waverly out, but
Right.
there's always one of those, and that's not the only time we see this. There's creepers, there's shadow people, and you typically are drawn to those. And now I have decided, which I think I've only done one big investigation this year. I've stayed at haunted places, but my major investigation was at the beginning of the year because I don't have an interest as much into going to the circuit, the public pay to play circuit.
Right. Right.
Um, and there are events that are worthwhile at these places, but I think we see these events pop up or these locations, and again, it's already mapped out so much that it's like, what are we trying to figure out here? We're confirming whether or not the allegations of it being haunted are true. I would rather work on the ground level, and it's like, at the beginning of the year, we did this place that was the first and last meeting house of the Whiskey Rebellion, and in the 1700s, and then the place burnt down and they built a house on it, but the basement was original, and they finally have this insurrection, these meetings to get to this insurrection where they tar and feather the tax collector, and we're the first investigators at that site. And I'm like, this is what I want to do. This is where I want to be. And we're sitting on top of the entire town, sitting on sandstone. And there's so many theories that you could go through and look in this whole town that's been forgotten by time. And not to run off on that specific place, but that's where it's like, you don't really know where to start when you're there, because
Right.
you have however many rooms are in the house, let's say 20 rooms in the house or in the basement and the backyard, and you don't know where to start. And I guess you begin by hearing what the witnesses are claiming. Like, I want someone to tell me something to begin with. So they sit you down and say, this is what I experienced. Okay, so this is how it's manifesting. How much of this can we deconstruct and write off as probably electrical or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
something normal going on? And then possibly like bring out the equipment when you're getting closer to this idea. But for me, and I know it's so boring to people, but I want to sit in that space and absorb the ambient anything that's going on before I
Yeah.
start. So it's like, you're already adding your body, your person, you're already a variable, let alone bringing in all the equipment and waving your arms and saying what needs to happen. So I guess like getting the stories, getting the history, getting everything in line. And not everyone needs to know the history because obviously there's a bias with that. But then just existing in the space. And I got ripped apart one time when I was just starting out, and I was like, I just kind of like to experience things organically and as viscerally as possible. And then someone was like, I stopped listening when she said that. So,
Oh,
but yeah, it was BuzzFeed had put out an article about me, and it used an excerpt from a video, and I now think like, no, I was right. Like I was on the right path, and I realized I had a lot of decisions to make over the years and where I wanted to be and what space I wanted to be in. And I started realizing cat balls don't make sense to me. Like there's certain things that
Right.
don't make sense, or uh, I don't think that I could record that as definitive when I'm starting again from the ground level of an investigation.
Right, right. And like, you kind of bring up a good point too, that some of these like, famous, almost like, amusement park haunted
Yeah.
places, there really is like these kind of built-in expectations of what's going to happen. Like you said, it's mapped out. It's almost choreographed, not, I mean, they can't make this stuff happen on demand unless they're faking it, obviously. But like, I wonder too, sometimes if expectations can get in the way of properly
Yeah.
investigating something.
Yeah, if someone tells you the little girl in the attic is actually a demon and not a little girl, that's what you're going to experience. You're going
That's
to
what you're
experience
exactly.
that they're mapping out what you're going to go through, and you're either going to walk away and say it's all BS, or that's the exact experience, and you're going to be like, whoa, it's exactly true the way they said. It's almost better to not hear this stuff. And a lot of times those specific ones, that exact spirits that are supposed to be there, those are the ones that you find out aren't tangible in history in any capacity. They're like, oh
Right.
yeah, you're going to go here and experience this. So, and like most of my paranormal experiences that I've had that are really profound are ones that just kind of happen on accident.
Mm-hmm. Right, right, right. I want to ask you, and look, this is a hop aboard the speculation station here, because obviously this isn't something we can totally answer. But I've been kind of interested in this idea, whether it's UFOs or any kind of paranormal activity, that there might be a co-creative aspect to it. Meaning that, like you can take that any way you want, but like almost to use a bad example, like if a UFO is in the sky but no one's there to see it, does it manifest? Or if there is a haunted location and sometimes there's poltergeist activity or apparitions, but if there's no one there to experience it, does it manifest? Like I wonder just like your thoughts and feelings, and sometimes
Or
or
if there is someone there and nothing actually happened, but they said that it did or represented that it did, then it did happen, right?
yeah,
Like
yes,
on the same train.
totally.
I had a friend who went to a location that had never had any claims of paranormal activity, and I had actually toured it before it was sold. He was one of the first investigators there, and he said a poltergeist ripped his camera off. And I said, before you went there, before they told you there was a poltergeist there, nobody had ever mentioned a poltergeist. And I said, that doesn't matter because you just got 20 million views on that. So now there is no matter, you know what I mean? Like that,
Yeah.
this exists now. And as surface level as my content can be, there's a reason why I do the things that I do. Like posting those dolls, I was like, well, what happens if 3 million people see these haunted dolls? How much energy can we put into them?
Right.
Because what started as a story, and actually they've passed through two different hands, since the beginning. So it's not just one person's account. There was the original person who provided it to that person, and then they were passed along to Ryan. And in that, instance, I'm like, okay, so now one person said they're haunted, and now Ryan thinks they're haunted, and now I'm going to say the story to 3 million people. It ended up getting like 15 million people, and I thought, could we
Wow.
supercharge them? And it didn't work, but honestly, I actually knew exactly what I was doing. Like, so people are like, oh, she's just like going and saying these dolls are haunted. I didn't. I just said that this is what was said, and I wanted to see what would happen. So my TikTok account in some ways is an experiment for
Right.
certain things. And now it's taken a life of its own because people say, I'm sorry for looking at you without permission. And I'm like, nobody set that rule. I never said that you had to apologize to them. I never said you had to ask
Yeah.
permission. There's so many things, like they're applying like Robert's rules and whatever else. And they say, oh, I felt sick. I felt anxious. And I'm like, what is instigating this? And I'm saying thousands of people have looked at them and said that they made me uncomfortable. And I'm like, it, I don't know. I think that there's value in it. So I've learned also to not take sensationalist content immediately as sensationalism for sensationalism. Sometimes there is like an ulterior motive. And that was one of the things I was like, well, if I'm going to have these allegedly haunted dolls, I might as well do it up as big as possible and
Right.
see if I can do that, which is kind of injecting a bias in itself. But it didn't make anything manifest any differently. It didn't, my life didn't get ruined the way
Right.
that the person claimed.
Right. Oh, that is so deeply fascinating. Just a couple more questions, and I just want to get like again, this is like something that doesn't really have an answer, but I just want to get like your thoughts on it. So, like, obviously, there's famous haunted locations or hotspots where high strangeness, UFOs, Bigfoot, ghosts, everything manifest. And I'm wondering, like, do you have any thoughts on what could be the reason why certain dwellings or geographical locations, like Sedona, Arizona, or southwestern Pennsylvania, have so much? Like, do you think it's just the death, or do you think there is maybe even something about the geography that's at play?
I think inherently the idea of a place that is sparsely inhabited is scary to people. And I think poverty scares people. I think that failed towns scare people. So when we look at a lot of these places, they come to dilapidated buildings. The idea of having all the money in the world and you build this big mansion and there's nobody there. The idea of being alone in the forest. I think a lot of these, without the haunted backstory, if you enter these locations, you're already on a higher level of perception.
Mm-hmm.
That you're going into this forest where it doesn't matter if people saw cryptids there or not. You're already more alert than if you were walking in the park.
Right.
And I think that that's a lot of it. I think a lot of people do play into the land being stolen and things like that. But when I look at these places where everyone has flocked to an area and then all of a sudden they leave that area, I think that scares people. I think
Mm-hmm.
failure is so ingrained into us to be afraid of, rather than that's a facet of life. And sometimes things don't work out and you work through it and you move forward. But it's like failure to some people means death. It means not surviving.
Right.
So I think when you look, especially southwestern PA, Rust Belt area, you
Yeah.
do see a lot of that. You see I'm going to be honest, a lot of people, poverty is their worst fear. And
Yeah.
so when you see these people living in these places, how many haunted locations that you pay to go to are in a small town with nothing else but a gas station? And you think about it and it's like, well, this makes sense. But when
Right.
the area is already thriving, okay, let's look at Salem, Massachusetts, a huge tourist area where people have lots of money. How many haunted locations are there that you can pay to investigate? None.
None.
And you would think that
Interesting.
there would be. There are
Right.
allegedly haunted hotels, but none of them even play into that. So the places that are already going through that, and even when you get into Gettysburg, they do have, like, the Farnsworth House is allegedly haunted and they're open to letting people investigate and stuff, but they're not a haunted place, for example, like Villisco, where the only reason you would go there is because it's haunted.
Yeah. Interesting. Interesting. And just one more question for you. Do you ever see yourself branching out into other forms of high strangeness? UFOs, cryptids, raining frogs, whatever?
So I think that there's a very natural balance with me with like spirits and death. It makes sense. I have this very humanistic approach. But
Mm-hmm.
what people don't know about me is when my initial like introduction was being like 15 years old and being like looking up the Beast of Bosnia and the Manhattan Project and the Devil's Footprints in
Sure.
Devon. Like I was extremely into that. And I think that I found like such a groove that that's what I'm into. But if someone was like, hey, can you look into this? Like there are things that I would explore outside of that. And I'm not like I'm a spirit purist, because
Right.
I believe what I believe, and I believe that there are things out there. How could I say that couldn't be? But it's not something that I've ever like found myself exploring in that way. Like I feel like everyone kind of has their own spaces, and
Sure.
certain communities, especially like the UFOs, and it's like I don't know if I can be around some of those people because
Right. There's a lot of toxicity there too.
yeah. So I have already dealt with, there's the death care community that I'm in, and I'm also in the paranormal and the oddities community, and then it's like it entering a whole other space and exploring that is like
Yeah.
I just, how much information. I mean, I have a whole lifetime. Why wouldn't I explore as much as I could, I guess?
Right. But yeah, perhaps down the road, but right now it seems like your schedule
You
is
need
pretty
more
full.
tools for the job.
Exactly. Beckie-Ann Galentine, this has been so much fun. I learned so much, which is always the greatest thing. It's the whole point of this. Truly appreciate your time. This has been so fun. Would you mind telling the listeners where they can find more of your stuff?
Sure. I can be found on Instagram and TikTok as My Bloody Galentine. And I also have several documentaries that are available on the platform Tubi. So you can find the first one I did, which is Pure Pandemonium, and Ghosts of the Grand Midway are on there.
Oh, cool. God, Tubi is the best. There's so much fun stuff on Tubi.
Yeah. Well, I don't even like set it up to be there. So I had stuff that was on Amazon, and I guess the production company, they just recently put it there. And I'm like, if it's there, people can watch it.
Great. The more screens it's on, the better. I think. Who knows? Yet to be determined. Becky, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. Everyone, thank you so much for listening to another episode of High Strangest. We'll see y'all next time. Peace.